Hi, my name is Tessa Brown and I'm here with my colleague John Weston to present the second in a series of short videos about IR35 and off-payroll working, which you'll find on our website. In this video, we'll be discussing the position of a private sector end user who engages the services of an individual via their intermediary, which will typically be a personal service company, although it doesn't have to be.
Thanks, Tessa. Yes, that's right. Typically a company, but it doesn't have to be. It could be a partnership, for example. Perhaps I'd also say that for off-payroll rules, the rules in respect of public sector engagers are essentially the same. These rules having been firstly introduced for them from April 2017. However, our focus is their extension and the wider application to the private sector, which takes effect from 6th of April 2021.
Thanks, John. You've said that the rules apply to the private sector, as the rules already applying in the public sector. So does this apply to all private sector companies?
Yes, any public sector engager, but from April 2021, also private sector ones which are large or medium sized and engage an individual via their PSC to work for them. So size broadly follows a company's house definition. So for a company to be small, it needs to meet 2 out of the following 3 conditions. It would need to have annual turnover not exceeding 10.2 million, for a balance sheet total of not more than 5.1 million, or no more than 50 employees. The detailed provisions can, however, make things more complicated and need careful consideration.
And so if the rules apply because of an engager's size, what are the consequences?
Well, they impose new obligations primarily on the engager. Foremost, and contrary to the position under the IR35 rules, which still apply where a private sector engager is only small, it is up to the engager rather than the worker to determine what their employment status would have been if the PSC hadn't been inserted into the contractual arrangements. Now, if the conclusion is that the worker would, but for the PSC, have been an employee of the engager, they are then obliged to issue the worker, and indeed any other entity with which they've contracted for the provision of their services, for example, if there's an agency involved, with a status determination which sets out the basis for that decision. And it's a good idea to issue one anyway, regardless of the decision, and to include details of the appeals process. It's part of the rules that the end client has an appeals process, so if the worker disagrees with the conclusion, they can challenge it, and the end client then has 45 days to respond. It's worth noting also that HMRC aren't involved in this, meaning that provided an engager has exercised due care in reaching their decision, the individual is going to have limited options thereafter. For those workers who are considered to be deemed employees of the engager, it or whoever else pays the PSC, for example, if an agency was involved, will need to deduct PAYE and NIC as the deemed employer from payments it makes to the worker's PSC. It's worth noting here also that even if the engager doesn't itself pay the worker's PSC, it could still find itself with that obligation if it fails in its own obligations or in limited circumstances if there are failures further down the labour chain.
Thanks, John. John has discussed very broadly the statutory obligations, but this of course translates into some very practical challenges for private sector engagers ahead of 6th of April 2021. A few of the challenges we've identified are identifying the contractor population and understanding the labour chain in your business, which can be complicated if you engage people through agencies. Getting comfortable with the status check, especially if you're using HMRC's CEST tool, which needs an understanding of the principles behind the questions. Having an appeals process and managing the resultant relationships with your contractors. Dealing with a payroll process, such as deciding if you need a separate PAYE scheme and whether you'll have multiple payroll dates if your invoice payment dates are not aligned with your usual payroll date. There are also additional costs involved for the engager, as even though these are only deemed employees, there is a Class 1 NIC liability which you can't recharge to the worker, and potentially the apprenticeship levy to consider too. We're well versed in helping engagers prepare, and if you do need any assistance, please contact either myself, John, or your usual MHA Larkin Gowan contact.